There we go.
Hey,
We're
everybody.
live.
Sarah Blessing. I'm with Corinne Sarah. We're with Project Next Media, and our entire media company is based on the fact that we need to unite the country and not divide. We are sick of other social medias, other news sources panicking us and profiting off of that anxiety and fear and division. That is not true. We do not need to fear our neighbors who might vote a different way or think a different way on a few things. Instead, we should talk and realize that we have more in common. So please, thank you for joining us. Subscribe, like, follow, share, and let's work together to get Indiana better, to get the country better, to unite, to get our communities better. Corinne Straight, tell us about your hit show, Plots and Politics, and what we're doing today.
I'm so excited. That was such a great intro, Sarah.
Thanks, girl.
And so much of what we're talking about in this series is critical to that mission of Project Next. We have to be willing to have conversations that make us uncomfortable. We have to be willing to have conversations that bring up pain and trauma and work through it. And that's really what we decided to dive into in this month's series of episodes during Black History Month for Plots and Politics. My name is Corinne Straight. I'm so excited I get to do this with Sarah Blessing. Plots and Politics is a show that we decided to put together because I wanted to dive into some of the craziest, most scandalous nonsense that kind of happens at the state level. Our first episode, I'll remind y'all, if you want to go listen to Plots and Politics, episode 1 or 2, actually I think it was episode 2, we dove into the one and only sitting U.S. governor to ever be assassinated. His name was William Goebel.
That was
number 2. That dude was insane, and he definitely was responsible for his own assassination. I mean, he did not pull the trigger, but he laid all of the groundwork there to his own assassination.
He definitely pulled ridiculous pranks to be governor. Was evident to many. That episode was fantastic. I had no idea of that story, girl.
That was so good. So we are going to get into a lot more of those stories. We have stories of how some of the first women became governors in the state in the United States, and it was because their husband died and they just became governor. So that's so funny. But for February, we have been diving into my favorite time period in American history to study, which is Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, and then into the Civil Rights era, into Jim Crow. So this is about 100-year time span. And Reconstruction was about 12 years after the Civil War, and it was what is called America's unfinished revolution. All of the promises that were made to Black Americans and all of the achievement that newly freed slaves had made were cut short after 12 years when white people freaked out and started passing legislation to curtail their efforts. And so I would encourage you, go listen to parts 1 and 2 of our Black History series.
And you don't have to stop listening to this one.
Nope.
But if you listen to this one, you're going to enjoy it because Corinne is a wonderful storyteller. She's freaking genius. Then you can go back and enjoy the other 2 episodes, which I'm just so proud of you, girl. I'm learning so much from you. And
I'm so glad.
I'm continuously shocked and mind blown at how human behavior is the same. The technology has advanced. We can get the word out quicker with social media, which is good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
But the things humans do are the same.
We are the
plots and politics of it all is the same. Yep.
And I will tell y'all, I remind people of this fun factoid because the name Plots and Politics actually comes from one of my French ancestors. He was a duke back in the 1600s in France. He was a nobleman. He was a plotter for sure, and he participated in the assassination of Henry IV. And it's really and so his description, when we found this genealogy, his description says he was involved in plots and politics throughout his life. And I was like, dude, same. Which I'm really excited. Part of his tomb is buried. Pieces of his tomb were on display in a museum in Bordeaux, which is where my husband and his family are from.
What are the chances?
Right? So the next time we're in Bordeaux, I'm be like, what up? We're going to go check out Duke Nogaret.
When you do that, which I know you're going to, Text me a picture of that. I
Absolutely.
want to. That's epic because I'm so happy for you. And that's his real picture in our little
That's right.
name of the show. Corinne made that, and that is him right there.
Jean-Louis Nogaret. That is my, I don't know, my 18th great grandfather, 16th
Cool.
great grandfather. I don't know.
I'm related to Anne Boleyn,
Oh, that's
George Bush, and Barack Obama.
that's
All on my
crazy.
dad's side. We can trace my dad's side tons. And like a one original member of like the Pilgrims.
Oh
Like,
my gosh, that's good.
yeah.
I think that's a lot of I have that lineage on my mom's side. My dad's side is more recently here. But the mom side, yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of French, there's a lot of colonizers. We probably got some slave owners back then.
Oh
which,
yeah.
which
We
kind
do
of brings
too.
yeah, which kind of brings us into part 3 here, because when we
Yes.
wanted to dive into this series, I talk in a lot of my videos that I make very freely about race relations and how it affects policy at a state level in Indiana. And over the last several months, anytime I have done that, I get lots of nasty comments, especially from white men who are very angry at me dividing us. Why do you have to make everything about race? Everything is not about race. Stop trying to divide us. And I'm not trying to divide us. We got to blame the people who started bringing slaves over.
Maybe don't take
400
it
years
personal.
ago.
Just because you all have the same color skin or close to. Maybe we're not talking about you. Don't take it personally.
It's not about you.
It's not
Daryl,
about you. You didn't
Daryl,
do it.
calm down.
You didn't go back and do this. We're not so they take it personal and then they lash out at you because their feelings are hurt.
Yep.
And everybody just take a deep breath. This
Calm
isn't about
down.
you.
It's not about
Humans are
you.
humans. I fully believe every human being has value and we should respect and love them equally. And that's what we're doing here. Humans are hurting humans back then. Humans are hurting humans right now. And we should always be working together to stop it and call it out.
Absolutely.
So
And
everybody getting offended, just tell them that it's not about you. Don't take it personally and say that to them nicely because they're probably sensitive people.
They are. And it's I use the example, like when I think of my French ancestor, Duke Jean-Louis, he was part of the French aristocracy. He was responsible. He and his people were responsible for the oppression of French, middle class and poor that led to the French Revolution, right? He was one of the bad guys. I have no problem talking about him. It has nothing to do with me. I can recognize what he did was evil and wrong and oppressive and violent. He literally helped assassinate a king. I have German, so I'm kind of split in half. I'm French and I'm German. Probably a whole bunch of other crap mixed in there too, but also have a lot of German family members. Most of us, I think actually all of us, were here in the US by the time World War II broke out. But if I learned someday that I had a cousin who fought for the Nazis, like in like some second or third,
you're not going to take it personal.
No, I would be like, hey, Franz, you suck. Like, why did you do that? Like, it has nothing to do with me. So,
and we should talk about that some because my husband is really good friends with a family from Austria, and their parents were forced to fight. They were against it. Austria got taken into Germany and they were forced to fight or they would be killed. And they didn't agree. And one of them escaped, walked barefoot through the mountains and went back home and kept working as I can't remember what his job was. And so just realized too, it's not as black and white because I know legit people whose family were forced to fight. So not everybody, it's not black and white.
It's not black and white. No,
there's Germans that live in Germany now. A lot of them have come to accept their past and try to make sure they don't repeat it, which is what we're doing here. Let's not repeat the past.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We want to learn from this. And right before I get into this story, I'll just mention to anybody that's on TikTok, go to Project Next Movement on YouTube, and then you can—
One word.
We're all one word, Project Next Movement. Thank you, Amber. Amber also said Sarah Blessing, Project Next on Facebook. Then you can hear both sides of the conversation. Because if you're on TikTok, you're only going to hear me. But if you want to hear both me and Sarah and watch us interact, head over to our other platforms. So,
hey, I put on makeup and got a nice dress on today.
She does have a nice dress on. She looks amazing.
For the first day since Monday, my children went to school and I don't have to be in charge of twin kindergarten e-learning.
Whatever God or goddess you pray to, we must pray that the stomach bug, we must thank that entity that
They're
the
healthy.
bug has left Sarah's house and her children
3
went to school
healthy
today.
children got on the bus
Yeah.
today. You don't
And he said,
understand.
peace out, kids.
I love them so
Bye.
much.
Love
Mommy
them
needs
so
some
much.
free
I
time.
need you to go. I need you
I
to
need
go.
some adulting time with my good friend Corinne Straight. Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so in part 2, so if you missed part 1 and part 2, keep listening to this, but feel free to go back and check out part 1 and part 2 wherever you listen to podcasts or
They're
Project
genius
Next
because of you,
Movement
girl.
on
They're
YouTube.
genius.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Go
we
listen to
did Reconstruction, which is really like a hard kind of 12-year time period right after the Civil War. We did post-Reconstruction, and then I took us up into about 1910, because in 1909 is when the NAACP was formed, because there was, oh good, there are people coming over here from TikTok. Thank you,
Sweet.
Brandon. That's awesome. So the NAACP formed in 1909. W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the founding members, but interestingly, he was the only Black founding member of the NAACP. The founding organization was all white people.
But it says in the name.
National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, correct. But the board and the original founders were all
Mind
white.
blown. I did not know that.
And part of this, of course, was strategic. They wanted to make sure that they had white support because they knew they were going to need it going forward. And there were plenty of white, white folks who were abolitionists, who were anti-segregation, who were anti-Jim Crow. So that's who they got on their side. But then they increased their membership. So their membership then was made up of Black Americans. And one of the most interesting things, I think, is they started this magazine called The Crisis. And the idea was that the only time Black Americans were featured in media, and this is, again, we're the same animals that we were 100 years ago, right? This is going to sound very familiar. The only time Black Americans were featured in media, in the news, was a mugshot. It was when they were arrested. And so actually, Frederick Douglass started this movement decades earlier of photographing Black people, because he understood the power of the photograph. He understood the power of the painting. Black people did not get their picture taken. They did not get beautiful portraits painted.
All the history erased. It makes my heart hurt. All these people that can't go back too far in their history and find things because nobody of importance gave them any value. It is heart-wrenching just to think these are people's relatives, that their ancestors, and how hard it would be to find a picture. Like, we're so lucky we found that young picture of Harriet Tubman, not just as older person. There's one picture of her younger. So that makes sense because we have some pictures of Frederick Douglass. We do. We have photos of Frederick, and he really started the movement. And so, especially when all of the Black men were being elected to positions of leadership in state legislatures and in Congress, their portrait was taken exactly the same way as their white colleagues' portraits were taken. And of course, Frederick Douglass really he had to help photographers learn how to light Black people, because that was not something, taking a picture of someone with white skin, it's very different than taking a picture of someone with dark skin. So it's actually a skill to learn how to light different skin colors. That makes sense, the lighting. And like Black makeup, just makeup for different skin colors. Different skin colors. You need to learn it like an art form so that you can get the right makeup. Yeah, that's interesting. So kind of carrying on that legacy of, we need to show Black Americans as something other than criminals, which that should not even be a novel thought, but it was. So W.E.B. Du Bois founded The Crisis magazine. He was the editor of this magazine and lead writer for a long time. And it was kind of the answer to white newspapers of just printing mugshots of Black folks. So The Crisis focused on Black art, Black social gatherings, Black churches. It would feature Black celebrities. It would feature just Black life, just highlighting Black life, just the regular everyday. And these articles became the go-to narrative for what was happening in Black America. So this is where they're really starting to try to undo all of the lost cause propaganda that was being pushed, especially by white Southerners, through organizations like the Daughters of the Confederacy. The Blacks needed a narrative. They needed a pushback narrative. And they said, okay, we got to organize. We got to start writing. We got to start getting out there in popular culture. And The Crisis was a key
to that elevation and public persona. And so so the crisis is going on. In 1912, so we're a couple years later. Absolutely, Benjamin. That would be called DEI today, right? Because y'all, everything is DEI and DEI is good. So let's just make, we need it. We need it. And especially women, white women, the biggest beneficiaries of DEI.
Yes.
The biggest beneficiaries of DEI are white women. And that needs to be said atop the freaking rooftops and mountaintops everywhere, because all of these white women, especially Republicans who are railing against DEI, do not recognize
we benefit from it.
You get to get divorced now. You can have our own bank account now.
Vote.
Vote. All of that is DEI, y'all. So Woodrow Wilson was elected president in 1912, and he was a white Southerner. And while he was not necessarily a proponent of slavery, he wasn't also a huge proponent of integration. He was considered a progressive, but he was definitely a white supremacist, 100% a white supremacist. When Woodrow Wilson took office in 1912, he officially segregated all federal offices. And so that had never been done before. So there were Black federal workers, but offices became segregated. And it was apparent. So Woodrow Wilson was kind of this figurehead now of the presidency. So you kind of, you had Abraham Lincoln in there. Then you had Andrew Johnson, who was really responsible for kind of the undoing and of Reconstruction. And then you have, so we kind of lead all the way up to Woodrow Wilson. And he's like, absolutely, we're segregating everything. So now this is the capital of the country segregating everything. And exactly what Benjamin just said. I wonder if Benjamin can see my notes, because that's the next thing in my note. President Wilson screened Birth of the Nation at the White House.
Boy.
And there are some major kind of like tent poles that I'm going to stake in the ground here that is going to build the tent of how we get to the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, because there are some major events that happened throughout the decades. And Birth of the Nation is one of those first tent poles. So if y'all are not familiar with Birth of the Nation, you can find clips of it. It's horrific. What Birth of a Nation did is it took that lost cause propaganda that the Daughters of the Confederacy were pushing of Reconstruction was the South reclaiming their way of life. They were reclaiming their way of life over Northerners, over Black Americans. It was all about the Southern way of life. And the Southern way of life is segregation. The Southern way of life is white supremacy. And Birth of a Nation was D.W. Griffith. He was the director. He was the producer. He was the writer. He was the son of a Confederate soldier. He's from Kentucky originally. And what he did, when we look at it from a filmmaking perspective, this is 1915. So of course it's a silent movie, but it will blow your mind when you look at the imagery of it, because it was a style of filmmaking that had never been seen before. Birth of a Nation was the first of its kind. It was like 3 hours long. It was a long movie. And so the length of the movie, the content, the costumes, the movement, and the imagery, from an artistic endeavor, Birth of a Nation was very advanced just from its filmmaking capabilities. And because of that, it made it, like Benjamin said, a very powerful piece of propaganda, because there were so many audiences around the country. So this is 1915. So you could even be 30 years old and you would not have memory of the Civil War. So you think of white folks all over the country in the North who really don't have any reference for slavery. They don't have any reference for Reconstruction. They don't have any reference for segregation or white supremacy. They go to the movie theater and they see Birth of a Nation, and they think it's real. They think it's true. They treat it like a documentary. And that it's very interesting because, again, we have the same thing happening now. We take it as truth, what we see on social media. So that those powerful pieces of propaganda, Birth of a Nation is one of the most, honestly, successful pieces of propaganda that the United States has ever implemented. And President Wilson, screening that film in the White House really set the tone for our offices are segregated. We are a white supremacist nation, a white supremacist administration. And Birth of a Nation, not only did Woodrow Wilson screen it in the White House, but it was the very first film ever shown in the White House. No film had been shown in the White House.
Wow, that's sad.
Birth of a Nation. How depressing is that?
So just like tying back to today's time, 2025, and back then in 1915, I would say it would be a little bit easier for the few people in power with money, with influence, to do this propaganda, since this is a new form. So few people can get, they're not getting information out quickly. So they can control the narrative and keep the thought going that Black people shouldn't be treated as humans, that they're horrific, that they're criminals. So they're pumping out all this horrific propaganda, and they're not pumping out at the same time the opposite, showing the truth.
Yep.
So I can see how this has damaged our country in 2025.
Absolutely.
Because many people are still racist. Many people still think Black people are scary. They do crime things. And so a lot of this stuff that they did, it has stuck. And it is our job as empathetic human beings to call it out in a way that doesn't make the person that believes the wrong thing feel offended, which is hard. We have to stay kind and compassionate. We can't lose our temper, but it is so important. We all know people that think things that aren't true about somebody that's different than them.
Yeah,
it's
because
human nature to fear.
Fear works, right?
Fear works. Fear works. It makes your brain not think rationally, and you're just like, protect my family, protect. And so that's why it's used all the time. That's why it's used today.
Yep.
So if we realize it's not necessarily these people's fault that believe the fake things, it is our job as humans that are trying to work together and make this country better. It's our job to talk to our loved ones and our friends and kindly and compassionately let them know, this is propaganda. You have been lied to, and it is not true. And that's good news. You don't need to fear this other group, trans, whatever, pride community,
whatever it is,
a different color, a different country, an immigrant. We don't need to fear them. They're all human beings just like us. And I think if we all took time in our day to do that a little bit more, our country would be doing better.
Absolutely.
Keep going, Kurt. Keep going.
That's definitely what we're trying for. And I want to make sure that the folks on TikTok know, if you want to come listen to our full episode and hear Sarah, you got to go to Project Next Movement on YouTube. It's all one word, Project Next.
Please subscribe
on YouTube and go subscribe. So Birth of a Nation not only was it an achievement in film, it was specific Confederate propaganda, white supremacist propaganda. And the KKK actually saw a huge resurgence of membership after Birth of a Nation came out, because the KKK they're parading around on horses. They're looking like these heroes. It's so disgusting. And membership in the KKK had kind of waned in like 1905, 1910. And the imagery from Birth of a Nation inspired KKK membership around the country. And actually the burning cross symbol that we kind of relate with the KKK, that we understand that they would put burning crosses in people's yards or burn a cross in front of Black churches. That symbolism was not part of the KKK prior to Birth of a Nation. That came from that movie. And because that was D.W. Griffith's interpretation, the KKK was like, ooh, we like that burning cross, so we're going to go ahead and take that. And so you see KKK membership increase, right at the same time that we have the NAACP. And so we now have kind of two factions, fighting for racial justice and fighting for the dominance of white supremacy happening at the same time. The NAACP, in addition to starting to feature Black art and Black life in their magazine, The Crisis, they also became a legal activist. They understood how much work they are going to have to do in the courts to overturn some of these laws and to start resetting the legal precedent, because all they need to do is go after and try to reclaim the laws and the rights that they had in the 1880s. And so they had these rights in the 1880s. It wasn't perfect, but they had freedom, and that had been taken away from them. And so that is the attempt of the NAACP, is to rewrite some of this legal precedent. And one of their first legal victories was actually striking down the grandfather clause in Oklahoma. And this was in Gwynn versus the United States. And the grandfather clause, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard of that before, but that is just another way that states were trying to circumvent the equal voting that was accessible to Black Americans. So when that,
so they're trying to stop Black people from
voting. Yep. So okay. The literacy test, the poll taxes, the constitutional tests were all ways that they tried to disenfranchise Black voters.
I didn't know about that until I saw the movie The Butler. And Oprah Winfrey played just like a strong Black woman that was trying to vote. And she kept going in to vote, and they kept asking her harder and harder questions. And she clearly had studied for like hundreds of hours, and she knew so much. And so they just kept asking harder and harder questions until she missed one. And then they wouldn't let her vote. And I'm like watching this as like just a regular person, not a history buff. And I'm like, what?
Oh, it's horrifying.
I had no idea that they did that. That they made them take these hard, white person, you didn't need anything. Well, maybe, I don't know what the rules were back then, but you didn't need to do that. You didn't have to go take an intelligence test on history, and they just kept asking you questions until you missed one. So horrifying.
It's horrifying. And it's always so interesting to me to think of that system, because the literacy tests and the poll taxes, it not only disenfranchised Black Americans, but it also disenfranchised poor white Americans who were not literate and could not afford to pay the poll tax. And so, being a newer country, only being a country for 100 years or so, they fled England because they didn't like the monarchy and they didn't like the system over there. And they wanted, quote, religious freedom or whatever. But then they come over to the United States and they attempt to instill the same kind of system. They want the caste system. They want white aristocracy. They want poor white, and they want poor Black. They want a caste system, which is what they claimed to have not wanted when they left England. And so that's always interesting to me, is like, they're still attempting to classify themselves in ranking, in a caste. And so white
humans be humans. They always they want rights for themselves, and then as soon as they get it, they're like, we better not let them have rights. What if they do something scary with it?
No, we don't need that.
We have that today in our Indiana Democratic Party. We have that.
We sure do.
The 30 people that get to vote for chair are like, no, we don't want you in here voting too.
The gatekeeping, right?
Human behavior with gatekeeping happens all the time. Happened back then. Yeah.
People are peopling always. And so Oklahoma had implemented a grandfather clause. And so the grandfather clause just said, like, if your grandfather was able to vote, like go 2 generations back, if your grandpa was able to vote, then you were able to vote. And so, of course, that it wasn't called the father clause, because some people had a father who was
they had to make it harder.
Who was old enough, right? So they're like, we got to go grandfather clause, because that's 2 generations back, and 2 generations of Black Americans were still enslaved. So that was one of the first legal victories of the NAACP. And that's really when the NAACP kind of cemented their worth and their mission. They said, like, look, we are overturning precedent. We are fighting for Black rights. So that's kind of really what took them to the next level, that they really became a legal force.
And then Terry said, I saw that poll tax would charge voters $100 in today's money to cast a ballot. So if we had that today, I think about how many people in my county would not spend $100 to vote. That would be $200 in my family for my husband and I. We would do it, and we would have to budget for it.
Yep.
Wow.
Think about that. Think about $100 in today's money. Yeah. And so you take an electorate So you take an electorate, you remove Black Americans, you remove immigrants, because many immigrants also, they had to establish themselves for a certain amount of time before they could vote. And then you remove poor folks of any color. All the poor people are. So like you have this tiny little electorate that is left. And of course, it's only men. So you have rich white men. I mean, it's just to think of how long that system perpetuated, and how that still is impacting the policies that we have today of the people that were elected 100 years ago, because your electorate was so tiny, so tiny. And so what is coming up and following the founding of the NAACP and the birth of the nation, we have the end of World War I. So there's another tent pole that we're going to stab in the ground here, that we're going to hammer in the ground. We have birth of a nation. The end of World War I was an influx of soldiers coming back home, Black and white soldiers coming back home, and Black Americans are the ones that were not even around maybe during the Civil War, or were not old enough to participate in the newly achieved freedoms of Reconstruction. They go over to Europe to fight, and they feel freedom in Europe for the most part. Black soldiers overseas were treated so much better than they were treated here in the US. And that's not to say that racism doesn't exist in Europe. Of course it does. They held slaves as well. But European countries outlawed slavery much earlier.
Right, much sooner. And then they didn't have the segregation, and they didn't have quite as bad as our attempts.
Not quite as bad
in America. So they're like, how many years, 50 years ahead of us.
They're probably probably a couple hundred.
And and it's not like we're not going to get there. We're going to keep getting better. But they gained some time because they didn't enact so many racist policies after the Civil War. Yeah.
Yep. And so I'm just typing back in here. Go to Project Next Movement on YouTube, y'all. If you want to watch our conversation, all one word, please subscribe.
I just want to shout out Benjamin and Terry that are giving such great comments about this subject.
Thank you so much. We do appreciate
That's the joy of doing this live. We can't put everybody on the show and talk to everybody, but we can read your comments and put them on the screen. And you guys are telling us really interesting things. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Yeah, thank y'all. And so this coming back home, Black Americans who had not experienced Reconstruction are coming back from a Europe that was much more friendly and welcoming to Black people than they returned to in the United States. And so, we see this pattern time and time again as well. We'll see it again for Black soldiers in World War II. We'll see it for really all soldiers, white and Black, when they come home from Vietnam. This idea of like, I just went out and did this really great thing for us. I was just so brave. And then I come back home and I am once again relegated to the outskirts of society. And so that led to an explosion of violence. And there are, in 1916, 17, 18, there are horrific riots all over the country. There's a time period called the Red Summer of 1919. And it was marked by riots all over the country. We're looking at Chicago, St. Louis, Arkansas, white on Black violence. And this was really an effort to eradicate Black communities, to dismantle any kind of Black wealth that had been accumulated to that point. So Black home ownership, Black businesses, Black children attending school. Even when they were attending an all-Black school, the white people did not want Black children to have access to an education, because we all understand how powerful education is. So the Red Summer of 1919, it's pretty horrific. And this was mainly directed at soldiers who were coming home from World War I, because when they're coming back, they've just been overseas working for a couple of years. They come back home, and veterans are entitled to jobs when they come back to their communities. And so there is this clash that is happening between white soldiers and Black soldiers, these veterans now, who should all have jobs. And of course, Black soldiers are being discriminated against and not given jobs. And so this tension is boiling up. So we're seeing this not just explode in the South. There, Chicago and St. Louis, northern city,
and imagine they're hurt. So a Black man goes and fights in war to protect democracy and freedom, and they come back and they're still treated like dirt and have no power and looked at as scary and terrible. And they're suffering. Maybe they have PTSD. Maybe they have an injury. war is hard on a human being. It's rough. And then they just feel so unwanted or cared
Yeah.
for and not trusted. You can only do so much damage to a person before they can't function well.
Mhm.
Like any human, I have had mental health problems and I am
Yep.
very fortunate in my life.
Mhm.
Any human, when they take a certain amount of stress, it messes you up.
It breaks you down.
So it breaks my heart that these black men and the poor white men that weren't getting treated well either, that they're coming back and not being treated with value.
Mhm.
It's sad to me, and we don't know these men's name, we don't know their faces. They're forgotten because in our culture they weren't deemed important, and I
Yep.
just want to shine a light on that I am sorry that happened and it hurts my heart,
It
it's
it
sad.
it's super sad, and you think of, I always kind of like to do the math in my head, and I think about, okay, well, who in my family, that's my great grandparents. That's who
It's
were
not that
adults in the
long. That's
1920s.
not
It's
that
not that
long
long
ago.
ago,
Yeah, my
and that
grandma was born in 1920. Yeah, or
Mhm.
22. Yeah,
Yeah,
1922. Yeah.
1922. So that, I mean, that it's not that long ago. I just came across a video on Instagram the other day. This Black woman, she was articulating how many generations back were slaves, and her great grandmother. She's like, my great grandma was born into slavery. She's like, so y'all got to remember, this was not that
It's
long ago.
not that long ago.
And so I love when we're putting it into context like that, and we think about generational trauma, and we think about how many generations it can take to break patterns of violence or substance abuse that often come as a response to trauma. Think of how many generations it takes to break that. Black Americans have been put into a position where they are generations behind their white counterparts as they work to break that trauma. And certainly what happened in the Red Summer of 1919 contributed to that. You have Black families that are accumulating wealth. They are really starting to put those building blocks together of the quote American dream. And then it's just being taken away from them because of white fear. And that takes us to 1921, which is one
The
of
year before my grandma
the
was
year
born.
before
This is
Sarah's grandma was born,
crazy.
1921. We have the Tulsa Massacre in Tulsa,
Oh,
Oklahoma.
I think this one was portrayed in an HBO show.
It was
Do you remember the name of that show?
yellow something.
No,
No.
it was one. I might be. Anyway, keep going. That there
Yes,
was a show that's got The Watchmen, The
The
Watchmen show,
Watchmen. That's it.
The
And that was
Watchmen
it was.
show on HBO
I'm pretty sure it was a
portrayed
graphic
this.
novel too. Yeah.
Yes, it was a graphic novel, and I did not know about this at all until I
Thanks, you,
saw
Ben.
that.
Thanks, Benjamin. The Watchmen. Yes. And so I remember watching like a PBS documentary on this a while ago. And when I found it on YouTube, it was, it's still in like the 4:3 TV ratio, the old square TV ratio. It's not 16:9 like we have now. It's like when it's the square one. I was like, oh, this documentary came out a while ago. And Dandelion is on TikTok, and she said The Watchmen was heartbreaking, but such a good show. Yes.
Yeah, because I did not
And
know about that. And there were several instances where there were these great Black towns because of segregation, and it was safer for Black
it
people to be
was.
in their own communities because when they went out, they could get charged. You'll learn this in the episode last week.
Yep.
They could get charged for anything, just looking at a white woman playing a game with a child, anything they could get charged with. So
Anything.
it wasn't safe for them to be with white people. So then they formed their own communities, and they were thriving. A
They
lot of them were
were.
thriving, which is wonderful.
And there were so many, because we talked in episode 2, part 2 of this series about those that left and those that stayed. So you had the Black Americans who stayed in the South, and then those that fled north to try to seek a better life. And so you have communities like this in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the Black Americans said, that's fine. We won't go to your white part of town. We're going to make our own town. And they were self-sufficient with their own businesses, churches, schools, homes, etc. This area of Tulsa was often referred to kind of as Black Wall Street because it was a financial district. And what happened was a bunch of angry white people came into Tulsa, and over the course of a couple of days, this went on for days. Eventually, the National Guard of Oklahoma was brought in to stop it. But over a course of a couple of days, there were over 10,000 people Black people who were left homeless because that's how many homes were destroyed. So 10,000 Black people immediately homeless because all of their
That's
homes
so
were leveled,
sad.
all
Think
of
of
their businesses.
the generational trauma and the
Yeah.
setbacks. If these communities were able to continue to thrive, how much better their children and grandchildren would be. We all like to think we got to where we are because of our own hard work. But
Nope.
I personally have to recommend or have to recognize that my mom and dad saved money so I could go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents always had a house. So if I became homeless, I always had a place to go. Not everybody has that. And
Yep.
I have to recognize I'm so lucky. So think about that. These people that were doing well, they put on their bootstraps and they
They
worked
did what they're
hard.
supposed to
They
do.
did what they're supposed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and it was all taken away unfairly. And their great grandchildren are around today, and their lives would probably be better if
Yes.
this wouldn't have happened. And I'm not saying I need to give up my money to them. I'm saying just recognizing it without fear and with compassion and love is is how we should handle this instead of continuing to harm them.
Mm-hmm. Because we understand when we look at generational wealth, especially for middle class America, for white Americans, property ownership in the early part of the 20th century is how the generational wealth of today exists. So much of that generational wealth for white families was passed down because of home ownership, because of real estate. And so if you imagine that Tulsa never happened, and these Black families, their homes are appreciating in value. They sell their home, they make a profit, they buy a bigger home. That is where all of these seeds of Black wealth and Black familial wealth were being planted, and they were just being ripped out of the ground over and over again. And that's what we see in Tulsa. What's interesting and how we can kind of tie this piece back to today even is, I want you to guess, Sarah. Guess what year the Tulsa Massacre was officially added to the school curriculum in Oklahoma. What year?
1965.
2020.
No. I was like, maybe the 80s. I don't know.
2020. The Tulsa Massacre happened in Oklahoma in 1921. It was 99.
Because I believe The Watchmen came out around then.
Maybe they're just like, oh, they made an HBO show about it. Maybe we should put it in history books. But yeah, 2020. So almost 100 years later.
Sad. At least it's in there now. At least
it's in there now.
But that learn about it now.
We can see, we can compare groups like the Daughters of the Confederacy with the modern day Moms for Liberty, right? These fear-mongering groups of people who are terrified of sex education, and they're terrified of LGBTQ, and they are terrified of speaking about race. The power that those groups had to keep this out of Oklahoma's curriculum. It is fascinating to hear stories.
They're clearly taking it very personally.
Very personally. Just learn about it, y'all.
They can't just recognize that was terrible, people hurting people, and maybe we should learn about it so we don't repeat it. They had to take it personally and pretend it didn't happen. And we see that happening in 2025 today with different state governments. I know we have a state senator here in Harrison County that is very scared about what our kids are reading. And he wants to go through our libraries and take out anything that makes a white man look bad. And he's definitely taking things personally. And it's something we have to call out constantly every day. They needed to call it out then. We need to call it out now.
We absolutely need to call it out now.
Same problems happening. It's a circle. History's repeating itself. Let's learn from it. And then you pointed this out to me a couple weeks ago. You said, "Oh, these people that are doing these things, they're the bad guys." In history, when you learn about them, they're always the bad guys. So if you are holding on to that fear that we should not be teaching the truth because it might hurt someone's feelings, just remember that's always the bad side, and maybe allow yourself to come in and learn some of the truth. And we're not saying you're a bad person. Don't take it personally. We're saying, let's stop repeating history and hurting people.
Yeah. because those are never the good guys in history.
In
We're none of these, the book banners, the race, these the
the people
KKK,
trying
the
to
white
limit voting,
supremacists, the people
making
trying to
voting
limit
harder.
voting, that none of these people are good guys, right? They are all going to be the bad guy in some movie someday. And so think about, this is where we talk about what side of history are you on? And acting as if this is ancient history tries to avoid people of any appreciation or relevance to modern day, and that's where we get into trouble, because the lack of understanding of this time period is very deliberate, and we can see that through the Daughters of the Confederacy, the work they did to manipulate textbooks and
That
manipulate
last
history.
episode is
Yep.
all about the
Go
Daughters of
listen to
Confederacy.
part
It's
2.
shocking. I did not know. I'd heard of that group, but I didn't know how influential they were at
Those women
watering
were
down
just
our history.
awful,
Yeah.
awful. And so that was kind of, that was Tulsa, that was 1921. And then during this time, the NAACP started to focus on lynching and legal accountability and record keeping for lynching. They worked for decades trying to get the Dyer bill passed through Congress. And the Dyer bill was just anti-lynching legislation that would allow for additional prosecution. It would have allowed for federal prosecution if the locals didn't want to prosecute. So if a lynching happened in your county and your sheriff said, "Oh, we don't care," and your governor said, "Oh, we don't care," the feds could come in and prosecute, because it should be viewed as the hate crime that it is. And this bill never passed. They tried for decades.
So sad.
It never passed. It actually passed the House, and then it was filibustered in the Senate. And there is a report that the NAACP compiled, which I do think is worth a read, at least if you just want to scan it. It's called 30 Years of Lynching, A History in the United States, and it goes from 1889 to 1919. And it is heartbreaking, and to see that Congress couldn't get it over the finish line because of the Senate that's important to remember. So there is no anti-lynching legislation. Now, this is of course taken much more seriously at a local level. It's now in state statute in a lot of places, but we don't have a federal law.
Cultural pressure on doing the right thing and treating all humans as human beings really helps with that.
Yes.
Because even though our policies are still behind, when you put public pressure, when you shine a light on a horror, that helps put pressure on the people in charge to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I'm noticing that's just going to come up over and over again as you talk about the way these political leaders, these Supreme Court judges, anybody in power, how they act and they continuously make the wrong choice. We are having that today all over the country. And since we live in Indiana, we focus a lot on Indiana. We have that today in Indiana. Even though the majority of Hoosiers, regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrat or they vote, even though the majority of them want a certain thing to happen, it doesn't, because the people in power are scared. Mm-hmm. And humans being scared is probably one of the biggest reasons we don't make positive change.
Yeah.
And so to just recognize this is a human problem, it doesn't mean we have to call out the person and tell them they're a terrible person. But if we can recognize, hey, you're human and you're scared. And when you're scared, you tend to not do the right thing. You tend to protect yourself and your family. And what if you do it and you get called out and you're so scared of? And us regular people have to put pressure on them and figure out how to put pressure on them so that they are. And then we might need to tell them how to do it. How do you do the right thing? They might not know. How do you
do the right thing? Yeah.
So
and how do you do the right thing? And how do you make it that it's not about you and it's not about, correcting personal responsibility.
We're not attacking a certain politician. We're just saying collectively as humans, we're scared and we don't make political positive change because of that. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big reasons I wanted to start Project Next Media is to call out, hey, look, this could be better. Let's all be made aware of it. And let's try to put positive encouragement to do the right thing. I just want to give people power today that are hopeless, because I know what it looks like on this day. What is it? February 21st, 2025.
Yep.
We can encourage people in power to make better choices, but it doesn't happen as quickly as we want. Right?
No. And this,
It's not bam, the change. It's going to take years, and
it's
we
going
got
to
to
take a
put in
long
the effort.
time. And we
So
and we see how many of these people, working for civil rights, working for, I mean, I think of there's so many quotes about from, women during the suffrage movement. We have to remember that it was only white women that got the
suffrage is
right to vote.
white women getting the
White
right to
women
vote.
getting the right
Suffrage
to
is a
vote.
scary word, but
And then some of these women working for suffrage in the 1880s, they were in their 50s, and they're like, I know I'm not going to live long enough to see it, but it doesn't mean I stop fighting. It's my life's work, whether the work reaches the finish line during my lifetime or not. And so there's a part of talking about this history that actually gives me a lot of hope, because I recognize the struggle. It would be nice if we didn't have to repeat the same struggles. If we could move on to other struggles.
My daughter had reproductive freedoms in
Wouldn't that be
Indiana,
great?
And if you think I'm not going to stop fighting for that until we get it back, you would be wrong. I will never stop fighting for that, for all of the women out there.
Exactly. That's
I
so
almost died.
whether
I mean,
whether we get it or not, like whether we get it or not, we're going to keep going.
And I'm going to be a happy person, and I'm going to take care of my family, and I'm going to love my husband, and I'm also going to fight for this thing.
Yeah.
And I worry about everybody else that's super stressed out. I want you can still have a happy life and still fight for this thing.
Yeah,
and we just have to do that.
Both things can happen at the same time.
Okay, I'm sorry to go on this tangent.
No, that's all right. So yeah, I'm going to jump around a little bit here, so I want to make sure we have got time to get through all of this. So there are a couple more periods that kind of, because anytime we see an economic downturn, we're going to see people who are already the most marginalized be affected the worst. So that was the same in the Great Depression. So following World War I, we have the Great Depression. Of course, Black Americans are hurt far more than white Americans. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt actually was a vocal advocate for racial equality, and she did help along with the NAACP, both worked to convince President Roosevelt, so convince President FDR to expand the New Deal to include Black Americans, because the New Deal created so many jobs. It was really a job program that was getting America back to work. And when Black Americans were excluded from the New Deal, that was a huge blow to them, because so many of them had still come back from World War I and had not economically recovered. Right. And so Eleanor Roosevelt and the NAACP and several others encouraged FDR to include Black Americans, and they threatened, they're like, hey, we're going to go march on Washington in 1941 if you don't do this. And so FDR actually agreed, and Black Americans were included in the New Deal, which gave them some jobs so they could just survive.
Again, this president, who we've largely look on as a great president, needed political pressure from this group of people to do the right thing. Same as Abraham Lincoln, because he's just given credit. He's just given credit for caring about Black people. But Frederick Douglass became friends with Abraham Lincoln and kept going to the White House and explaining to him how giving Black people better treatment would help him win the war. And Abraham Lincoln was a smart man and listened and
listened to
did
the strategy.
The advice. Same as FDR here. So it's important to recognize these people are not just blindly making the right choices. They need to feel the pressure. Same as what we're doing today.
They do. And they need to, and so FDR was like, okay, all right, we'll do it. We'll let Black Americans have jobs. And so they did. They were able to enter the workforce and kind of benefited from that time period and from that economic resurgence as America was rebuilding after the Depression. Going into World War II, was again another time where Black soldiers, they adopted this mantra of called the Double V campaign. So they wanted victory in Europe, and they also wanted victory at home for Black Americans. And so to think of these Black soldiers overseas fighting for the U.S., understanding not only is their fight overseas, they're going to have to come home and they're going to have to keep fighting too, keep fighting for their freedom here. And so they had this double V mantra. There was a lot of articles written about it. It was featured in magazines. It was featured in some posters. So there was some traction there. But again, World War II happens. They come back home, and racial tensions are very, very high in the 1940s. And I want to highlight this next story because there are hundreds and thousands of stories like this that can be told during this time period. And I want to highlight this one because I think it hits on some of the most egregious areas of corruption and just blatant white supremacy that we see. And this is the unsolved murder of Harry and Harriet Moore. I love that their names go together, Harry and Harriet Moore.
Is it Moore?
Moore.
That's my grandmother's maiden name, the one that was born in 1922.
Oh, Moore, Moore. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And these two, Harry and Harriet, are a Black couple in Florida. They actually founded the Brevard County NAACP chapter in their home county of Florida. That this was during a time that post World War II tensions were really, really high, and they were recognizing the need to have an NAACP chapter in their home county. And the Moores, Harry Moore, eventually would go on to be the executive director of the NAACP for the whole state of Florida. So he kind of rose up through the ranks and became a very powerful civil rights leader in the Old South in Florida. Leading up to their murder, an instance called the Groveland case happened. And it was, once again, a pattern we see over and over and over again, Black men being accused of rape against white women. And so there are 4 Black men who are accused of raping a white woman. Is there evidence for that? Nobody has any idea. Evidence didn't matter back then.
No.
And there were 3 men, and one of them was actually a 16-year-old boy. And one of the men, when he found out he was being accused, he fled the county. He was actually tracked down by a white mob and he was killed. The other 3 went to trial. The 16-year-old was sentenced to life. And the other 2 men, Shepard and Irvin, they were older and they were sentenced to death. Harry Moore, as the executive director of the NAACP, organized a campaign because these were wrongful convictions in his eyes. And actually, their legal counsel at that time was led by Thurgood Marshall, who would go on to be a member of the Supreme Court, a very influential member of the Supreme Court. He was their attorney at the time. So he was the attorney for the NAACP, leading a lot of these legal actions. They appealed this all the way up, and they got it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court in 1951 overturned the convictions of Shepard and Irvin, and they were ordered to receive a new trial. In 1951, Shepard and Irvin are being transported to their new trial. They're in handcuffs. They're in a car with Sheriff McCall in Florida. And according to McCall, both men attacked him, and he had no choice but to shoot them.
Of course.
And so, of course, so 2 handcuffed men, he shoots them. Shepard unfortunately died at the scene, but Irvin survived his injuries. And he said later, he's like, oh, absolutely not. This dude shot us in cold blood. Like 100%. We did nothing wrong. We were handcuffed.
Think of the power these people that don't care, that see Black people as other and don't value their life. The power they had on these Black people for just years. I mean, Black people probably looking down. Yes, ma'am. You see that in the movies from back then, how they're very polite and, yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. And they look down because they're terrified. They're going to get accused of a crime and end up in prison or killed.
Yeah. Yep.
It's
so
sad.
They can't, it's just minding your own business. And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm on trial for what? I mean, it's just, and know
it's human nature. There are bad people out there that and it doesn't even necessarily mean bad people, but people like to control people because it makes them feel more control in their own life. So, there's a lot of unhealthiness of that going on. I see it today in 2025, people trying to control other people. Yeah. And this is it was so easy to control them
because the whole system was set up.
And, and that's why a white kid could quickly learn that control and order Black men to do stuff, and they have to do it.
It's ingrained. It's learned. It's learned behavior. You think about your child is not born a white supremacist. That is absolutely taught. That behavior is taught. And
look what I can do to this creature that doesn't deserve our compassion.
It's that tool of, again, the white woman victim of sexual violence is so powerful. We saw it all during the 2024 campaign as well, of all of our Republicans running for Congress highlighting brown men being accused of a violent act against a white woman.
But then ignoring their own
all the other violence.
If it's a white man, we don't, and the
we don't talk about that.
Too.
Nope.
The Democrats cover up their white
They
men
sure
too.
do. Everybody's guilty. There's no party here when it comes to horrific behavior.
Right.
But that, you see how powerful that protect our white women narrative is, and how powerful it still is.
They use that to control and manipulate us, and to keep fear of people that are deemed different, when we're all freaking human beings. We all deserve respect.
Absolutely. And so after Sheriff McCall shot these two men, Shepard died, Irvin survived. Harry Moore, as the executive director of the NAACP, called for McCall's resignation and called for his indictment. He should be indicted for murder and attempted murder. And he even reached out to the Florida governor to intervene and to help in this. 6 weeks after this happened is when the bomb went off under the home of the Moores.
Wow.
So a bomb went off. Harry and Harriet were gravely injured. The hospital that was closest to their home would not treat Black people, so they had to go to a hospital 30 miles away. Harry died on the way to the hospital from his injuries because it was 30 freaking miles away.
That's
and
sad.
Harriet died 9 days later from her injuries. And this was the first, they're kind of called like the first martyrs of the NAA, of the civil rights movement, because they were the first official NAACP members to be murdered for their work in the NAACP.
Wow.
The FBI
would go on. What year was this?
This is 1951.
Okay, not that long ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. And the FBI investigated, so the federal government did come in and investigate. It was pretty obvious from the start that the Klan was involved. There was no evidence that Sheriff McCall was actually specifically involved in the plot, but he didn't really have to be. The Klan was already going to kind of do this stuff on their behalf.
Did they search for the people that did this? Was there any
justice? They tried. Yes, there was never any justice. So nobody's ever been brought to trial for this. There were 4 men who they believe were the perpetrators of this, 4 Klan members. Of course, they are all way long dead. But one of them, the leader of it, his name was Joseph Neville Cox. He was a leader in the KKK. He was questioned by the FBI pretty extensively in 1952. And following a questioning session with the FBI, he went and took his own life. And then he was pointed at later as being the orchestrator of the plot.
Pointing out, when you're on the wrong side, it messes with your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And this person, in my mind, deserves to acknowledge what happened. If he did do it, say sorry, be given a chance to be better in society. We should just care about people. And it just makes me sad. Yeah. People killing people, and then maybe whatever else they're having, mental health problems, whatever. We should care about them, not only for them, but also keeps the community safer. When we care about everybody in our neighborhood and make sure they're taken care of, their basic needs are met, that protects our own families from violence or thievery or whatever. So even if you're against helping people, you can even look at it through a selfish lens of helping people helps you.
Yes.
And I encourage everybody to do that, because
go ahead. Whatever it takes.
My family, so I want my neighborhood safe.
I
care about the people suffering too, but I can acknowledge I also want to protect my family, so I can make room for all of it. But yeah, if these neighborhoods were safer for the Black people, it would also be safer for the white people. Yeah.
And looking at what happened to the Moores, that bombing really kind of kicked off a horrific spree of bombings. So bombing became one of the favorite tactics of the KKK. They wanted to bomb any Black family who tried to move into a middle-class neighborhood, who tried to, buy a house where they felt you're not allowed to buy a home. And so bombing was a very effective intimidation tactic that was used by the KKK during this time.
Because they did that to Martin Luther King.
Yeah. Yep,
And
they
like
did it to
black churches and
churches,
all kinds.
homes, everything.
When I went to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, where Martin Luther King died, it's across the street from the Lorraine Motel where he was shot. Um, I was appalled at all the history I didn't know. It wasn't just Martin Luther King killed.
Oh,
There were
it's so much.
so many black
Mhm,
leaders, white leaders that were sticking up for basic human rights that were
mhm.
murdered, a lot of them by bombings, and a lot
Yeah,
of them by just like setting the house, the bus, the church on fire. A lot of
yeah.
that.
And that's why I tried to really pick out kind of in this part of this series is pick out the names that maybe we haven't heard of, the Harry and Harriet Moores, because the way that this history has been taught to us has been in such a cherry picked fashion, that maybe we know about MLK, maybe we know about Rosa Parks, but we don't really know about anybody else. And so the next kind of big tent pole that we have here is Brown v. Board of Education, which was the landmark Supreme Court case that overturned Plessy v. Ferguson. So Plessy v. Ferguson was the case that established, hey, as long as it's equal, separate is fine. And Brown v. Board of Education was actually a culmination of lawsuits in several states. Several states came together and appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, actually, separate can never be equal. Those two things cannot happen at the same time.
Yes, I learned that in school to be a
Yep.
teacher. That was something I had to know.
That it cannot be equal. So when, and again, white people lose their minds. So all of a sudden they learn, oh my God, we have to integrate our schools. Oh, hell no, we're not doing that.
The fear, because they've been pumped all these fears about people with different skin colors. Oh no, they might hurt my children. And then you go to this crazy place in your mind. It doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense. So what did white people do? They started creating a whole bunch of laws that would divert money away from public schools. And they opened a ton of private schools. And
it's like we're talking about today in Indiana.
Isn't it? That's why school choice, it's racist, y'all. School choice and school vouchers, it's racist. The vouchers using tax dollars to pay for private schools started in the 1950s. And it was
our
a blatant...
state has taken that on. We're like the highest state in the country right now, tied with Arizona and then Florida behind us, doing it the most.
And we have only become more segregated. So each time when you kind of watch all of these movements, so we have Reconstruction happening and progress is kind of made, and nope, white people freak out and they take it away. We hit 1954. Okay, we're going to try to start building back, and then white people freak out and nope, we're going to immediately take it away. So none of these attempts for equity were ever followed through. We don't know what could have been because we've never actually followed through on it. We have allowed the fear and white supremacy to overtake all of these historical moments. And so you see white Southerners panicking. These tuition vouchers come into place. And in 1956, the Southern Manifesto was drafted. And this was drafted by members of Congress. And this was in a direct response to Brown v. Board of Education. And they wanted to reestablish Plessy. They wanted to reestablish segregation in their schools. And so this Southern Manifesto was just horrific white supremacist, our Southern way of life kind of talk. It was signed by 19 senators and 82 representatives. So certainly not a majority, but enough that it's concerning.
To keep it. Yes.
And notably,
and it's not all white people. It's the white people in power scared of losing their power. We have that happening in Indiana now. It's the same human story over and over again. Most humans in Indiana want more rights, want freedom for everyone.
Yeah.
But the people that we have elected that want to keep their power do the things to keep harming them to protect themselves in that spot. So it's important to realize, I wonder what the majority of the country felt like, especially those that weren't getting to vote and weren't getting rights. How did they feel about it? I wonder.
And I'm sure it was just to them, it was, I mean, to any Black Americans, especially those living in the South, because these were their congressional representatives writing this manifesto. It was just another slap in the face to them. It was just another, because you have all of these protests, you have marches happening, you have sit-ins happening, you have the bus transportation movement happening all around this time. And so again, Southern white leaders are freaking out. And when the manifesto was signed by 19 senators and 82 representatives, it was notably not signed by Lyndon B. Johnson. And it was not signed by, there were 3 Southern senators. Al Gore Sr., so Al Gore's father.
Oh, wow.
Lyndon B. Johnson, and then one other senator. And so these senators had presidential ambitions. And because LBJ would go on to run in the primary.
And they didn't want to be used against, they didn't want this to be brought up to be used against them. So again, political pressure,
exactly,
helping them do the better,
the decision, right thing,
the moral thing.
Yep. And so LBJ, as a Southern senator, was chosen. He ran in the Democratic primary, didn't win, and then he was chosen to be JFK's running mate, which was a very controversial decision because they did not like each other at all. But he was a white Southern Democrat. And so JFK, being a Catholic Northerner, he knew that he needed a white Southerner to run with him. And of course, that decision would propel LBJ into the presidency just a few years later when JFK was assassinated. And that's kind of another tent pole to strike down here, is the assassination of JFK. And to understand, I mean, not only are there ripple effects from that assassination, but largely, I think you could easily make the argument that without that assassination, civil rights legislation would not have been passed.
Yeah.
Or it would not have been passed.
If Lincoln would have survived, we'd be better off in America. If JFK had survived, we would be better off in America. Our progress would be a little bit forward. It's interesting to think what would have happened if those violent acts wouldn't have happened. It's interesting and tragic.
And JFK had been working on this civil rights legislation, and it was difficult. It was not getting traction. And LBJ kind of said, he came out and he was like, what better way to honor his legacy, y'all? Let's pass this legislation. And so give
him some credit. Yeah, that's kind of
some credit.
A popular move. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yep. So because the nation was in mourning, and so he kind of recognized that there's an opportunity here to take advantage, really, and honor the legacy of Kennedy. And so LBJ worked to implement what he called his Great Society. And so this included a litany of social programs, Medicare and Medicaid. There was an expansion to Social Security. This also included civil rights and anti-employment discrimination and voting rights. So we see the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 get passed. The Voting Rights Act of 65 outlawed discrimination in voting. So finally, 80 years later, Black Americans are federally returned
80 years after the Civil War. Boy, girl, you taught me so much.
So they remember they got it back, right? So black men were voting in the 1880s, and then boom, it was taken away from them. So we're looking at 75, 85 years that they fought to get it back. So that is where we talk when we that famous Martin Luther King quote, right? The arc of social or of morality is long, but it bends towards justice, right? We're looking at, the people who started this movement when the NAACP was founded in 1909. I'm just going to do some rough math here and bet that they're all dead. They're all dead by the time, this is 55 years later, they're all dead by the time the Voting Rights Act is passed. And so that is when we think about, it's a depressing thought, but it can also be a hopeful thought. If you understand that your work for civil justice or restoring rights or restoring access is not going to happen in the next midterm or the next presidential election, it's the long game. It's eventually going to bend towards justice. And
Barack Obama says this all the time. He said, progress doesn't go like this. It's not a graph that goes like this. It goes like this.
Yep.
And we're in a little bit of a down.
We're in a little bit of a downturn right now.
We keep it going. We keep it going. We keep fighting. If we stop fighting, if we lose hope, that's when the keeps going down. And I deserve better for my children, and
Yep.
you all deserve better for your children and for yourselves. And we have to work together to demand progress,
And
just like
hopefully,
these wonderful people did that fought, and a lot of
mhm.
them lost their lives doing this, you
Oh,
know.
so many, so many. And there's definitely, I mean, this is such a huge time period to study. And there are so many events that I did not get to. There were some in here that, like, just for the sake of time, I've like skipped over.
And we can do this
But
whenever you want to talk about it. We can do some
we
more
can do,
episodes.
yeah, we can
I
do
would
some
love to
more.
talk about recent times, even in Indiana. My dad, Raymond Horton, he's a composer, and he is somebody that's fought for civil rights for a long time. He
Hmm.
actually wrote a piece that's a play too, where he had like the choir at his church perform it. And then it had like a PowerPoint in the background, and it taught facts, and it taught me so much. It was about America and segregation. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't realize certain Indiana towns were segregated as white towns. Palmyra, where I live, was
Hmm.
one of them. It was segregated. You were not allowed to live there if you weren't white.
Yep.
And guess what? We're mostly white in 2025.
Oh yeah.
So, um yeah, like, I didn't know that. So I would love to even go more
We could
about
definitely go.
why we are
Yep.
still so segregated in 2025. Yeah.
And and talking about school choice and everything is absolutely playing into the deepening of segregation and the racial separation, and certainly the lack of this being taught in schools. That's a tactic. I mean, that is a tactic that was established in the 1890s, and it is still very effective today. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965, I just wanted to point out that if anyone has heard of Strom Thurmond, he was a congressman for like 9 million years. I swear that man was never going to kick the bucket. He voted against it, of course, because he was a proud white supremacist and segregationist.
Wow.
And he did not die until 2003. That's when he was still in
What?
Congress. Strom Thurmond, and of course, he's not the only one that voted against it, but he lived the longest. 2003, this effing dinosaur is still in Congress until he dies.
We have to demand better.
We have to demand.
We
I
have
mean,
to demand
we
better.
have to
use
remember how recent.
our power to communicate and shine a light on things to
Mhm.
demand better. What do you want to do for your next episode? Do you have an idea what you want to do?
I
Because we are ending a
do.
3-part series. Will you tell us a little preview? Because I can't
I
wait.
I think I want to dive into some of the education effects, and really kind of looking at school choice and the exacerbation of segregation and racial inequity in education, because it's another movement that started that did not get up and going. We never really tried for equity. We never really let it happen. And after 1965, of course, you see, there are so many examples of horrific racial violence that we see after 1965. And what certain organizations and certain movements have done is that you watch it go underground. You watch things become dog whistles. You no longer see, white people only restaurant signs, but you have gentrified neighborhoods that keep people out of certain income levels. You have educational institutions that keep people out. And so we have, again, in this time period, a push against DEI, a push against affirmative action. Famously, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was admitted to Yale Law School because of affirmative action, and then he votes to tear down affirmative action when he is a sitting member of the Supreme Court. And so we see how much of this history is continuing to repeat itself. And when you look at, and I'll just leave y'all with a couple of these stats. School choice is kind of one of the most current examples of kind of the constitutional circumvention of educational access. So all of these states, when we go back to Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow, they created all of these laws that were not necessarily saying, I'm discriminating against you. They're just putting in the barriers that make it unrealistic for you to achieve that thing. So the grandfather clause, the poll tax. school choice is very obviously a blatant constitutional circumvention because it does exacerbate segregation. The vast majority of students who attend private schools are white students. It takes money away from public schools, and that was the explicit written intent of these laws in the 1950s, was to take money away from public schools because they wanted them to close.
I worked for a Catholic school for 18 years, so I love to tell you the propaganda of what we were told. So I have it on the other end, and I don't want anybody to think we are going after anybody that works in a Catholic school or charter school, private school, because I am from there. And I loved, and I still love, every single one of my fifth graders, and I love the parents. So to be able to be humble and realize I was a part of propaganda. I believed fake things. I got myself out. And now I come from a place of actually living in that culture for 18 years. So I would love to give you what I was told and what we thought, because we did not know that we were damaging public schools. We were not told that.
No, and that,
because we're caring people, and the students that go to the schools are caring kids, and the parents are caring parents. They're not told the truth.
And you don't think of you, and because we're not taught any of this, we don't think of any of the history that leads up to that. And that's why there are two, there are competing narratives here. You have somebody saying, well, voting doesn't matter, so just don't even do it. But then at the same time, they're attempting to restrict your right to vote because the people in power know.
Why are you making it so hard?
Voting matters. Yep. And if public education doesn't matter, it's not that important. If public education did not matter, they would not be trying to destabilize it. They would not be trying to undermine it because they understand that public education is a form of equity that is present for an entire community. And if you educate an entire community on an equal basis, or you strive for equity, that is a huge threat to power. And so
you want to keep that power with all your might.
Absolutely. And so we have, our governor in Indiana, our lieutenant governor, our attorney general, they speak about being proud Christian nationalists. Y'all, Christian nationalists is not a religion. That is rooted in white supremacy. That is rooted in Christian supremacy.
On women, on anybody different, on the pride community, on different races is terrifying and doesn't look like any Christian type lessons I was taught. So so we'll talk about that next time. I'm excited. Okay, you guys. Thank you so much for being
y'all
here.
This was a good one. There's so much more we need to get into, but we're going to do that in the next episode.
We're going to just keep doing shows. Don't worry. We're a brand new independent media company. There are lots of things you can do to help.
Yes.
You can share. Wherever you're watching this episode, please share. You can also send it to some friends. Text it to some friends that you think might like it. And then talk to them about it. Like you and I are talking. It's fun. It's fun to talk about the same material. So send it to people. Please share. If you're on Facebook, just click share. If you're on Facebook, if you go to our pages at the very top, you could click on the 3 dots and invite your friends to our pages. I've noticed some of my friends that are getting nervous about what's happening in today have started tagging me in their conversations and saying, my friend Sarah Blessing is doing something. Maybe she can tell you about it. And I'm like, thanks, I'll tell you about it. I'm also starting to come to organizations and talk about what we're doing at Project Next. And you're starting to do that too, Corinne. And you also have influence with your TikTok and your Instagram. Way to go, girl. So get the word out about Project Next Media. Did you know this, Corinne? I typed in yesterday on Google Project Next Media, and like 50 things came up, and like 20 of them were ours, and they were coming up first. And when I started and I did that, nothing came up.
None of our stuff came up. So we're changing
in
the search algorithm. And then
just in a couple months, we are getting there. If you type in Project Next Media on Google, our stuff starts popping up. And that's thanks to all of you, all the viewers. So please share our stuff and invite your friends. And we really, really need YouTube subscribers.
Go subscribe to you, but also subscribe to Project Next wherever you listen to podcasts. And so you don't get, if anybody's a podcast
Project Next Media. I think you type in Project Next Media, 3 words. And
you can also type in the name of the episode. If you type in plots and politics for this one, it will come up. You will see it. And the only way that we know, if anybody is watching, is if you subscribe or if you leave a comment. We don't see viewer numbers.
And you can rate our shows.
You can rate it, subscribe, leave a comment, share it with your friends. That helps us a lot.
We are growing. Thousands of people are seeing our shows now. This matters. We're going to keep trying to help as many as we can to unite the state and the country and to bring positive change to make your life better. If you have money and you would like to support us, if you have extra income, you can go to heyelmer.com/projectnext. Elmer is a friend of ours. He has a local business here, and you can sponsor us and get a gift. So pick what sponsorship you want to do, and then it costs for shipping and handling too, just so you know. But you can get a little item, a small item for $10, and you can go all the way up to like a Project Next hoodie for a $200 sponsorship. And that helps us to get more media equipment and to get advertising and to keep growing, so that when we shine a spotlight on things that are not right, our voice matters more and more, and we can create positive change. So thank you all. I loved you all. Thank you, Corinne. What a joy and gift in my life that we met and we're working together. I can't believe it happened.
And thank y'all for so many.
Because I asked. I'm so proud of myself.
Yes. And it happened because we're like, oh, we just started talking about Indiana, and you started running for things, and I started making videos, and here
my
we are.
hairstylist Dana said, you need to get on TikTok and follow Corinne Straight. And I had no idea who you were. I get on and see, oh, the star, Corinne Straight, making these amazing videos. Thank you, Dana. You know?
Yeah, way to go, Dana. Good.
And she was sick the day she was supposed to meet you and didn't get to come to the Women's March. I know. But we'll have you down here again. Yeah. So,
and to everybody that's been commenting, thank you so much. Really appreciate y'all. This has been a good conversation. Yeah, and Terry said once you're able to have memberships, they can financially support us on YouTube. So we're getting there. We're getting there little by little, where we have more opportunities to support us and with sponsorships. So we
love to anybody that is sharing our stuff, liking, commenting, sending it to friends, texting it to friends, letting them know about it, because just because it shows up on your Facebook doesn't mean it shows up on their Facebook. Again, let's do this, y'all. Let's unite. Let's create positive change. Let's call out those scared to make the right decisions and help encourage them. And thank you, Corinne, for teaching us so much. I love this.
We're going to get into so much more next week. So yeah, come back next week, y'all.
Also, Instagram did not kick me off after an hour, so I think they changed it.
Oh, that's
still live on Instagram.
All right. That's good.
You can't comment on Instagram, but you can now watch the whole episode. So good job, Instagram. Yeah.
Instagram.
So, yeah. That's cool. Okay. All right.
Y'all.
See y'all later. Oh, yeah. Wait. Bye. Sorry. One more thing. I got a show Sunday. Jesse Brown, Indianapolis City Council member. They tried to strip him of his committees for just trying to help the homeless and actually change some policies for the good in the city of Indianapolis, try to help the schools. He's just calling out things that we should actually do. They are trying to censure him and stop him. And he is going to be on my show, Get the Word Out, at 1:00 on Sunday.
That's awesome.
That's a Get the Word Out show. And then we just had a giant live yesterday. We've never had so many people on at one time, where we interviewed Jennifer McCormick, Destiny Wells, and Karen Talion, who are the 3 women running for Indiana Democratic chair. Only 30 freaking people get to vote for that. Boy, do we got to put the pressure on those 30 people that they do the right thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't believe it's only 30 people. Hashtag gatekeeping.
I know, right?
We need to fix that, right? Yeah. So, and I'm also going to be talking about the horrors happening with the Palmyra Town Council on the Sunday episode, because there is a town council woman who is harassing and bullying the rest of the staff, and they're trying to get them all to quit so that they can get more people that want to hurt us in power in Palmyra. So I'm trying to save my little town of 900 here. So I will also be doing that on Sunday with Jesse Brown. I'm going to teach him what's going on in Palmyra. He's going to teach me what's going on in Indy, and we're going to encourage regular people to fight for better.
That sounds good. All right.
Sorry to go on so long. Okay. Love you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.